Las Vegas looks invincible. It is the world's playground, a glittering neon oasis that screams forever from the middle of the desert. But it's a mirage. Most people think a global powerhouse like this could never vanish in our lifetime, but the collapse has already begun. Tourism is dying, the rivers are drying, and there's a ticking clock on the city's power source that has set Vegas on an irreversible path to becoming a ghost town. Today, we are looking through the lens of a future timeline to witness the year-by-year fall of the Strip. We've mapped out exactly how the lights go out. We begin our timeline in 2029. Looking back, historians often point to this year as the beginning of the end. People thought the city was in danger because the water was running out, but the plumbing was fine. The taps were flowing. The crisis wasn't hydraulic, it was electric. You see, by 2029, Lake Mead had finally dropped to 950 feet. This was the specific depth where the water sits below the Hoover Dam's intake pipes. For a century, those pipes provided Las Vegas with a massive advantage. Think of the dam like a permanent 25% off coupon for electricity. It was the city's price anchor, a guaranteed source of cheap power. Therefore, when the water dipped below the pipes, that coupon expired. The turbines stopped spinning, and the city lost its discount. Now, losing 5% of your power grid doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to look at the bill. Without that cheap hydropower, the power company was forced to go shopping on the open market. They had to replace that cheap energy with expensive natural gas and solar. It was like forcing a family to stop shopping at Costco and start buying everything at a gas station convenience store. Therefore, the era of cheap living in the desert ended overnight. We called it energy poverty. Suddenly, running your AC unit in July wasn't a utility, it was a luxury. We saw surge pricing hit the electric grid. Imagine sitting at your kitchen table in Summerlin. It's 115 degrees outside. You open an electric bill that cost more than your mortgage. This was the new reality. The working class was faced with a monthly math problem that had no solution. Do I cool the house to a safe temperature, or do I buy groceries? Therefore, we saw the first wave of migration, not a flood, but a trickle. The locals, the people who actually keep the city running, realized that the desert tax had simply become too high to pay. But while the locals were sweating in their living rooms to save a few dollars, the casinos on the Strip realized they had a much bigger problem. They couldn't turn off the lights. So, to survive this new energy cost reality, they made a cold, calculated decision that changed the soul of the city forever. They decided to fire their customers. Fast forward to 2035. The Blackout Era had stabilized, but the cost of doing business had permanently shifted. The casinos looked at their ledgers and realized the old model, the high-volume, budget-friendly Disneyland for adults, was mathematically impossible. For decades, Vegas relied on the loss leader strategy. Give them a cheap room, a cheap buffet, and they would lose money at the tables. But when the AC bill for a 4,000-room resort jumps by 40% due to the loss of the dam, a $29 room creates a deficit before the guest even checks in. Therefore, the corporations pivoted to ruthless exclusivity. This was the era of intentional gentrification. The city stopped advertising to the bachelor party from Ohio and started hunting exclusively for the whale. If you visited the Strip in 2035, you felt the chill immediately. Resort fees hit $100 a night. Minimum table bets soared. The cheap shrimp cocktail didn't just get expensive, it vanished. But the biggest killer wasn't even in the city, it was in your pocket. By the mid-30s, online sports betting and digital casinos were legal in 45 states. The unique utility of Las Vegas, the monopoly on gambling, was gone. Why fly to the desert and pay $500 a night when you can gamble from your couch in Chicago? So the tourists stopped coming. The casinos arguably remained profitable. They simply serviced fewer, richer people. But a city cannot survive on whales alone. A drop from 42 million visitors to 34 million might look manageable on a balance sheet, but on the ground, it was a massacre. Fewer bed sheets to change, fewer taxis to drive, fewer drinks to pour. We saw deep structural unemployment tear through the service sector. The valet drivers, the housekeepers, the dealers, the people who actually made the city run were suddenly redundant. The economic safety net was gone. Vegas had transformed from a resilient mass market machine into a fragile luxury boutique, completely exposed to the whims of the global elite. The corporations had successfully engineered a way to survive the economic crisis. They fixed the money. But in their arrogance, they forgot about the one thing they couldn't negotiate with. They forgot about the concrete itself. By 2040, the conversation shifted from economics to survival. We stopped checking the stock market and started checking the thermometer. Climate models from the 2020s had predicted aridification, a fancy word for the desert reclaiming its territory. But reality moved faster than the models. By the start of the decade, Las Vegas wasn't just hot, it was a thermal oven. We were seeing 40 days a year above 110 degrees. This brings us to the phenomenon of the reverse winter. Just as people in Minnesota hunkered down in January to avoid freezing, Las Vegas residents were forced into a mandatory lockdown from June to September. You didn't go outside. You didn't walk the dog. You moved from an air-conditioned house to an air-conditioned car to an air-conditioned office. The urban heat island effect meant the city never cooled down. The concrete absorbed the solar radiation all day and radiated it back at night, keeping overnight lows above 95 degrees. The city couldn't sleep. Therefore, the infrastructure began to fail. We saw the no-fly zone become a regular summer occurrence. It sounds like science fiction, but it's basic physics. Hot air is less dense than cold air. When the tarmac hits 120 degrees, the air becomes too thin for heavy jets to generate lift. Flights were grounded for hours, trapping thousands of tourists in a glass airport that struggled to keep cool. But the damage went deeper than flight delays. Outdoor labor became lethal. Construction crews faced mandatory work stoppages. Road repair became impossible during the day. The asphalt highways literally buckled under the stress, turning the morning commute into an obstacle course. The physical maintenance of the city slowed to a crawl because the environment was actively trying to kill the workers. We were trapped, hiding indoors, watching the pavement melt, praying for the grid to hold. But we told ourselves it was okay. As long as we had water, we could survive the heat. We could artificially cool our way through the apocalypse. But then, the Supreme Court finally picked up the gavel. The year is 2048. This is the year that the water war finally ended. And contrary to what you might think, it didn't end with a dried-up lake bed. It ended with a piece of paper. For 20 years, the Colorado River Compact had been held together with duct tape and handshakes. California, Arizona, and Nevada had been fighting a cold war over every acre-foot of water. But nature doesn't care about treaties. The dried ground in the Rockies was soaking up the snowmelt before it could even reach the river. The evaporation rates in Lake Mead were outpacing the intake. The math was broken. Lake Mead hovered near 895 feet, the absolute breaking point where the pumps literally cannot lift water out of the reservoir. California, the agricultural engine of the nation, played its trump card. They argued that food security for 300 million Americans was more important than the fountains of the Bellagio. Therefore, the federal government intervened. In a landmark ruling, the Department of the Interior enforced strict prior appropriation rights. The pumps to southern Nevada were throttled. It was a federal cutoff. The result was immediate and catastrophic. It wasn't just that you couldn't water your lawn. That had been banned for decades. It was the cost of treatment. Pumping the sludge from the bottom of a dying lake required massive, expensive filtration plants. Water bills quadrupled overnight. The shadow city culture of resilience finally broke. You can survive the heat if you have cheap power. You can survive the prices if you have a job. But when the government tells you that your access to water is no longer a right, but a luxury service,
the psychological dam breaks. And that leads us to the final domino, the year where the lights stayed on, but there was no one left to look at them. We arrive at 2050, the Exodus. This wasn't a panic, it was a resignation. It was the Las Vegas math finally resolving to zero. For nearly a century, the deal was simple. The wages are low, but the living is cheap. You move to Vegas to be a dealer, a bartender, a valet, and you could buy a house with a pool. But look at the equation in 2050. Rent and insurance had soared to coastal levels. The climate tax of energy and water bills devoured a third of your income. The reliable union jobs on the Strip had been automated or deleted by the luxury pivot. The equation had inverted. The wages were low and living was impossible. Therefore, the working class left. They moved to Buffalo, to Duluth, to anywhere that didn't charge them a premium just to exist, and the weather wasn't trying to kill them. And when the workers left, the city didn't die, it hollowed out. We saw a critical labor shortage that collapsed the essential services. The luxury condos on the Strip were still there, gleaming in the sun, owned by shell companies and absentees. But the schools in Henderson closed because there were no teachers who could afford to live in the district. The hospitals went on permanent diversion because nurses migrated north. The trash wasn't picked up, the roads weren't fixed. The shadow city, that vibrant, practical town that lived behind the neon, evaporated. What was left was a strange, silent shell, a playground for the ultra-rich that was slowly being buried by the sand, serviced by a skeleton crew of commuters who drove in from 3 hours away. It became a city of ghosts before the people even died. The neon was still bright, but the houses were dark. So, looking back from 2050, we realized the desert actually didn't kill Las Vegas, it simply waited. We built a neon monument to defy the odds, but we forgot the one rule that every gambler knows. Eventually, the house always wins.
If you enjoyed this video and want to see more visions of the world of the future, please like the video and subscribe. It helps the algorithm push our videos to more people.